Welcome everyone to this week's Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And for this week's topic, I'm going to show you how to deploy an iOS app to a device and how to submit it to the App Store. So to start with, we need an app. So we're going to take a look at the app we worked on last week, which is Xojo Notes. And you might remember at the end of the webinar last week, there were some questions about an iPad version. So this version of Xojo Notes here, actually, I've added a few things so that it runs on an iPad a little nicer. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to go through what some of those changes are. And then we'll go through the steps that you need to do so that you can actually build this to test it on your own devices, and then build it so you can submit it to the App Store. All right, so I'm just going to run this real quick here. I think I should have checked first, see if it's running in iPad mode or not. No, it's still running on an iPhone. So it runs on an iPhone. We already saw what that looked like last week. So let me go back here and change the simulator device to an iPad. And you can now see it's running in split view mode. It auto started in portrait because I have the settings, which we'll look at, set to say that this, when it's on an iPad, should only run in portrait. In landscape. And so the simulator automatically switched. So you can see here it's using the same views that we created. Looks like I can make that a little bigger, get rid of the scroll bars. It's using the same views that we created for the iPhone version, but they're displayed in a split. So on the left-hand side, we've got the list, and on the right-hand side, the details. And I can click and change things. I can add new information. And whatnot. And it works, pretty much the same. It's using all the same code that was already done for the iPhone version. But I did have to make a few changes to account for both things essentially being displayed on screen at the same time, rather than just the list being shown or the details being shown, but never both at the same time. So let's just briefly take a look at what some of those changes might have been or are. So the first one, which we briefly touched on, is the iPad screen. And this is where you can set up the content to use a split rather than just a single view. And then when you set split, you get to choose what's going to appear on the left and what's going to appear on the right for the main and the detail. So I set them up as the list and the detail, just from the views we already had. I also turned off portrait mode for iPad display and left on the landscape mode so that this app essentially only works in landscape mode on an iPad. And then if you look at the list view, the changes that needed to happen here, let's expand a few things. Very similar to what you see in this sort of thing here. There's now this test here that checks if we're running on a split view. And if it's not nil, then we are running on a split view. So we can get what the detail split view is, cast it over to the actual detail view that's being displayed there, and then assign the selected note to it. And then the else part contains the iPhone code that we already had written. So essentially this part of the code is what gets added to detect if it's on a split view. And that similar type of code is here in the toolbar button event handler for when you want to add a new note. There's again this if else. This is the original iPhone code we had, and this is the newer code to handle that. You'll notice looking at this, there is a new method call. Where is it? Yeah, right down here, select row. And this selects the new row that just was added. And that is actually using a declare. And in the declare webinar in a couple of weeks, I'll go through step by step how to find find that particular command in Apple's docs and how to essentially translate it down to Xojo code so that it can be used. In this particular case, it allows you to select a row in a iOS table. And there was another method added here called update table that essentially is called by the detail. So when any changes are made to the detail, it can call this method so that the list gets updated. We didn't really have to worry about that before because they were never shown at the same time. So whenever the detail closed, we could just update the list because we knew that. But now because they're both on the screen at the same time, we really want the list to update pretty much right away with any changes that are happening. And then the detail view was updated with essentially a method here that, again, checks if it's on a split. And if it is, it calls the update method that I just mentioned, and then it saves the data. And then all the controls were enhanced with their change events to also call the update, the new update master method. And that's pretty much it. That with this code in place, the app works on both iPhone and iPad with a pretty different layout on an iPad, which is kind of nice. I do like the split view. It gives you a lot more room to work with. And it's nice having two things on the screen at the same time. So it's one thing to be able to run all your apps in the simulator. That's incredibly handy because you have full access to the debugger. But you still need to test your apps on actual devices. And the big reason is, of course, because the devices use a completely different processor than the simulator uses. The simulator runs on your Mac, so it is using the same processor as your Mac. It's not simulating an iPhone processor. It's using the x86 processor. So when you run in the simulator, your app is compiled as an x86 app and then run in the simulator. So that uses the same compiler that's been used for many, many years with Xojo. But when you compile and build your app for a device, it's using the brand new LLVM ARM compiler. Now, this is obviously different than the x86 compiler, so there could be some behavior changes. So it's always good to test. It's also important to test on the device because the simulator doesn't simulate everything. So you may want to try some real devices and make sure you're getting the behavior you're expecting. Little things that I've run into that the simulator doesn't do quite the same as displaying the keyboard. The simulator doesn't always display the keyboard because you have a keyboard available you can just type on, and you have to manually toggle it to appear. And that might affect how you want to lay things out. Certain declare commands that I've created don't run on the simulator, only run on the device. And there's just other various things that are not quite going to be the same on the simulator. And I think I've even seen on our forum, and even when I've searched Stack Overflow, the simulator even has a few bugs of its own where it just doesn't properly simulate an actual device and things don't work. So although it's very handy and an absolute necessity when you're developing, building for a device is pretty important. So you build for devices by using the build button on the toolbar. Now, in order to actually put something on a device, though, you have to go through some setup. Apple's iOS devices are all very secure and don't allow you to just throw any old app on them. You are going to need an Apple developer account. You're going to need to create the certificates to allow apps to be code signed so that they can be put on the devices. And you're going to need to do all this stuff. And you're going to kind of have to do it using Apple's tools, but you only have to do it once, luckily. And I'll walk you through the steps here. I also will point out that we do have them outlined here. If you go to the new Xojo doc site, there's two sections here, device deployment for testing and submitting to the App Store, that pretty much are going to walk you through what I'm going to cover here. And have other tips and things to pay attention to. So if you haven't done any of this, and I think we won't see it here, yeah, when you click on team, it's going to say none. So I could do a build right now, and that may be handy if you want to do a build to make sure it builds, but you won't be able to copy that build over to a device because the device will complain and say that there's no valid signature for it. It's not approved, essentially. So what we need is to have something in this team dropdown that allows everything to be properly code signed so that the resulting build can be copied over to the device and run. So the first step in that is you can actually use Xcode to start to set some of this up. And you're not going to use Xcode from a programming standpoint. There's just a couple of things that are built into it that we need. One is the preferences. So you can see here, I have my Apple ID, and it's connected to a couple accounts. And you would just add your Apple ID after you've signed up with an Apple developer account. And then I click View Details here, and you can see there's nothing here. Now, hopefully this all works, as I went through all this, of course, yesterday, and it worked just perfectly. And then today I went through and removed everything, so it looks like I'm starting from a clean slate. So hopefully that all continues to work. But the little plus button here is where you can add your signing identities that will allow the apps to be deployed. For device testing, the one you need is the iOS development. So we pick that and we let Xcode do its thing. And right now it's communicating with Apple's server to create the certificates and pull down all the information it needs and put stuff in the appropriate place. And then when that's all said and done, you get the little message here that signing identity was successfully generated, which is good. And now you can see I have an iOS development signing identity, as you would call it, which is essentially used for code signing. So that's the first major step. Obviously, that was a pretty easy step. Didn't really have to do much. And it's not really that you have to do a lot with this process. It's just jumping around from a few different places. Apple's steps are not very clearly defined. And most people aren't going to be familiar with these tools if you're primarily a Xojo developer, so it's a little bit new. Now we're going to go to Safari, and we're going to go to the iOS Development Center. And here you log in with your iOS developer account, and you're going to pick the certificate identifier and profile section. It doesn't matter which one of these here you pick on the side. You get your whole menu here. And you can see I have a certificate that was just created. This was created just now by Xcode. So that's all fine and dandy. And the other thing, though, I already have on here. You should also see a wildcard app ID, which is going to be default. These two are showing up because of apps that have since been submitted to the App Store. But when you look at it, you'll see just this app ID here. And it's very important that this is there. But again, Xcode should create that for you automatically. The other thing that is needed is your device IDs for your devices. And you'll need to manually add these. Right now, my device is already in there, which is great. But if yours are not, you need to hit the plus, put in the UDID from your device, and then add it over. And then once you've added your device, you can go back to Xcode. And you can just hit the refresh button again after you've added your device. And this will probably won't really do anything in this particular case because it's already set up with everything. Yeah, the only thing is it popped down a message here noting that we did not request a distribution certificate yet. We're going to do that later, so I'm just going to click Not Now. The distribution certificate is for submitting to the App Store. So once you do that, you've got hopefully what you need to do device builds. Now, let me just check my notes here. Now, the important thing to remember is that these things change. If you notice they all had expiration dates. I created this today, so it expires in 1 year. So in another year, if I haven't generated new ones, I'll need to do so. If I, in this subsequent year, purchase a new device and I want to add it, I can go and add the device, but that will invalidate some of the things that were created originally with the older devices. So I'll need to come back here and refresh so that it recreates things and pulls down the new profiles. And from what I've gathered, seeing, scouring the internet and reading Stack Overflow, these things tend to sometimes just stop working for what appears to be no logical reason. So sometimes you just have to do essentially what I did here to test this is you click on the thing and you revoke the main certificate. And then you go back to Xcode and you essentially start from the beginning and you have it recreate things and pull things back down. And that seems to solve any problems that random problems that come up, and it allows you to continue. All right, so we've created these things here. So we can go back to Xojo. I may need to restart Xojo to get that to refresh. So let's do that. All right, so now we're back here. And when I click the team dropdown, you see there's now a new entry, which is my Apple ID developer program name. So I can pick that. And that's the only thing you need to pick when you're build testing for a device. And then once you do that, hang on, I got my little screen sharing control blocking the buttons again. All right, then you click the build button. And this will build. Now you'll note that I said that this is using a different compiler. That's important to note. This ARM compiler is a little bit slower than the x86 compiler. So you may notice that, well, not in this particular case, but on some projects, it may take a little longer for your app to actually build. So just be patient. That'll continue to be optimized over time, but just be patient. And certainly if you stumble across a project that's taking way longer than you really think it should, by all means, submit that to us as a feedback case so we can, go through that and optimize the compiler for that particular case. And what that will create is these two files right here. The build creates these two files. This file is left over from an App Store build, which we'll be doing shortly. But when you do a regular device build, you get these two files. This one here, the file with the big no symbol over it indicates that it's an app, but it's not an app for this particular thing. This is not a Mac app. This is an iPhone app, so it's not going to run here on the Mac. But this is what we're going to want to copy over to the device. This here, the file underneath, is what's called a debugging symbol file. You're going to want to keep these around. If you get device crashes, crashes on device, crash logs will be created. And if the symbol file is available, these crash logs will actually have useful information in them rather than hexadecimal memory addresses, which aren't too useful for debugging. So you definitely want to keep this around for anything that you actually deploy or are testing extensively. So don't just go deleting these. And if you actually, have some friends or something that you've added and you put the apps on for them, keep a version of the dsym file for whatever version you've sent out to people so that you'll be able to figure out what any debugging information says should you want to get it back. All right, so this file here is what we need to get to the device. All right, Dwayne is asking here a question, what Apple developer accounts do you have to purchase? You have to purchase the Apple iOS developer membership, which is a yearly membership. It's $99 a year plus tax. And that's all you need for iOS development. Of course, they also have a Mac one that's also $99 a year if you want to submit apps to the Mac App Store or code sign them for a gatekeeper. All right, so we got the app here. So to get this onto the device, we need to use Xcode again. So Xcode here in the window menu has something called devices. So we can pick that. And this here will show any devices that are plugged into the computer. So what I'm going to do now is plug my iPhone 6 in. reaching for the wire. All right, it now showed up here, so I can click on it. And you can see some information about it, including the device identifier, which is handy, the operating system it's running, and other things. You can also see any apps that have been installed from Xcode. So these are essentially development testing apps. And you can see I pretty much have built and installed every example included with Xojo on my phone for testing purposes. But Xojo Notes is not on here at the moment. I did remove it. So if I go back to the Finder, the process of copying this to your device is relatively simple. You just can drag it. And then after that, you can see that it's right here. I could have also hit the little plus button down here and then found it in the file selector. You know, whatever works for you. But now you can see the app is now on the device. I can pick up my device and look myself. I'm not going to show you because that will mess up the screen recording. So I go to my little section here. And yeah, there it is on page 3. It's one thing when you do copy things onto your phone or iPad like this, you really never know what screen it's going to show up on. It seems like it just throws it in wherever there happens to be an open space. So you got to kind of search around a little bit. But it is on there now, and now I can run it and I can test it. Going back up to the top here, there is a little button here called View Device Logs. And this can be handy when you, if you do have any apps that are crashing. So for example, you can see I was testing Eddie's Electronics and I did have a crash. And I can click on it and I can get a list of the log information. And you can see here it was crashing in something related to the About view. So this is very helpful information when you submit a feedback case that engineering staff can look at and give them a better idea where the problem might occur. So that's how you can review that stuff because we don't yet have debugging on the device. I'm sure that will arrive eventually, but it's not yet available. One other thing that's helpful here in this window is you can right-click on the device that's plugged in, and you can pick here, Show Provisioning Profiles. And you can see all the profiles that have been installed on the phone or the device, because you can have more than one if you have multiple developer accounts. And you can check expiration dates and that sort of thing. And sometimes you'll notice when I just dragged it over here, it just kind of worked. And that's good. That's another little thing that Xcode's doing for you is it's actually taking the new provisioning profile that it created and it copied it over to the device along with the app if it noticed it wasn't already on there. It seems like I've seen some cases where that doesn't always work. And if that's the case, you can manually add the provisioning profile, again, using the plus button here, because you can download it directly from the website. So that's another situation where if it turns out your profile is not quite right, you could find the particular profile on here, download it as a file to the computer, and then manually add it to the device. Generally, you do not have to worry about that, but it can happen. All right, let's move on to the next topic here and see if I have any questions before I do that. Let's see, James is asking about using the SQLite database file on an iOS app. Can you move it back and forth? Well, you can certainly, install an initial database file along with your app using the copy files build steps. I think you can get it back using iTunes. That's a bit off topic for this particular webinar. I don't have the particular steps offhand, but I'm going to make a note. That might be something good to cover in the docs, a blog post, or maybe even another webinar. All right, so the next thing we want to do is build a version of this that we can submit to the App Store. So if you're looking again back in Xojo in the build settings here, you'll see you still need to have your team selected, and there's a switch right here called Build for App Store, and it's off, and I can tap it, and now it's on. And that is essentially the only thing you're going to need to do in Xojo to make a build for the App Store. We still get a little bit more work to do to create the appropriate provisioning profile and whatnot. But this is what you're going to need in Xojo. In addition to one other thing, you also need to make sure, and if you forget to do this, you'll get a error when you attempt to upload the built file. So you have to make sure that the short version is filled in. And actually, I'll leave it blank here so we can see what the error looks like when we do submit it. Now, if I were just to flip this switch on and try and build it right now, I'm expecting I'll get an error that says it doesn't have something it needs. And there we go. So we got an error because we don't have the distribution profile. Remember, we created the development profile. It's unfortunate they both start with D, but we actually need a distribution profile. So we need to go back to Xcode and request it. So we go back to the Xcode preferences. And I hit the little plus, and then this time I want to request the iOS distribution. This again does its communication with your login with iTunes, the Apple servers, and we'll eventually come back with hopefully a nice message that says all is good. There we go. All right, so now we can go back to Xojo. Close this. And I can build again. Now, when I did this yesterday, I did get another error. So we'll see if we get it here and how we might resolve it, or we'll see if this worked, and I'll explain what the error was I got yesterday. All right, good. I did get the error. So it says distribution profiles required, but we just created it. So what's going on? Well, when all else fails, you got to head back over to the iTunes portal here. I'm looking at my distribution profile. And I can see here that it's telling me that it is invalid. Now, I don't really have any idea why it's invalid. And it could be that Xcode didn't create it right. This is not the same error I got yesterday. Yesterday, when it tried to create it, it used a different wildcard ID, which didn't match the one I was using in Xojo. But again, this is the sort of thing that can happen. So we can click this edit button and see if there's anything here that looks out of place. That looks right. Let's make sure it's using the new distribution we created, and then hit generate. And click done there and look at it again. All right, so none of these now say invalid, so that's good. So theoretically, I probably want to go back to Xcode, and maybe just hit this refresh, make sure it pulls down that little change we just made. All right, well, it looks like it maybe pulled down something here that it hadn't before, so that's good. All right, so now we can try going back to Xojo and hope this works this time. All right, so the build switch is still on, so I can hit the build button. All right, much better. And it's important to keep in mind that odd little things can happen like that. That seem to be a common complaint, especially if you search Stack Overflow. And sometimes, take another look at it, check to make sure that Xcode did what it was probably supposed to do, and if not, manually correct it on the website. So the build here, this is what it created, this IPA file, which stands for iPhone packaged application or something like that, iOS package application. But anyway, it's a package. I could actually right click on this and show package contents. I guess maybe I can't do that in the Finder anymore. Oh no, sorry, it's not a package. It's actually a zip. Excuse me, I'm mixing up my thing. This is actually a zip format file. So if I actually wanted to see what was in here, I could rename it or add a zip extension to it, and then double click it, and then it would expand, and I'd be able to see what's in it. There's no real reason to see what's in it, but just more of an FYI. So this is what you need to submit to the App Store. So we now have our IPA file, so that's good. So the next thing you need to do is actually prep the App Store to receive this file. So we'll go back to Safari, and you need to log into iTunes Connect, which you'll be able to do once you have your account. And then here you can add apps that you want to submit to the App Store. This handles both the App Store for iOS stuff and the Mac App Store. So you can see here I already have two. I have TipView, which is essentially the tip calculator app that ships with Xojo that I submit through my account for testing purposes. And you can see right now it's actually in waiting for review. The original version went up with the first version of Xojo that could create iOS apps. And the one that's currently waiting in review is the 64-bit version that was built using the current beta of Xojo to test the 64-bit builds. So that all seems to be working fine, and we've submitted this app and are just waiting around for Apple, which is another thing you'll hear. A common source of complaints is, you go through all the time to build your app and you're working on it and you get everything ready and you're so excited and you submit it to Apple, correct any issues you have, you finally get it submitted, you press the button to send it off for review, and then you wait. The hardest part is the waiting. You're going to wait probably 7 to 10 days for it to change its status from waiting to review to in review. And then once it goes to in review, usually it's approved within a day or two. But that waiting is killer because you're just like, it's all good, I'm ready. And you're just sitting around waiting for Apple to do whatever it is they do to get these things approved for the site. So that can be a test of your patience. So essentially, I already have the app here, so we'll use the one that I've created. But you can just click to create a new app, and you give it a name. You choose whatever the primary language is. You choose a bundle ID, which will generally be your wildcard one. You can give it any version number you want. And then you have to give it a SKU, which stands for stock keeping unit. And this is just, as it says here, unique ID. No one sees this. So for Xojo Notes, you can give it anything you want. You call it Xojo Notes. You can call it whatever, but it's something you just want to have that's kind of a code to identify your app. Once you do all that, you end up with this page here. The big iTunes Connect page that has to be filled out with all kinds of information. The big thing is after you've created the initial app page here, you're now ready to actually submit the app. I shouldn't say submit. You're ready to upload it to iTunes Connect. It won't be ready to do the submit for review until you go through all the sections here. I'll just quickly scan them, scroll down so you can see them all. The first thing you're going to need to do is have at least a single screenshot for every sized iOS device. So you're going to need to take these screenshots. It's really easy to take screenshots from the iOS simulator. You can just go run your app in the iOS simulator, go to the file menu and hit save screenshot. And then you can essentially go back to Xojo, switch the simulator device, run it, take a screenshot, and do that repeatedly. And of course, you see here, you've got 5 devices. If you actually want 5 screenshots for each device, you're taking 25 screenshots. You can also put a video preview in here as well. I haven't tried that myself yet, but that's a new thing they added. You can name your app, give your app a nice description, put in some keywords, general URLs or whatnot. You have to supply an app icon. This icon has to be, I believe, 1024 by 1024. See if the little help thing says it. It doesn't say that. The important thing that I noticed here with this is that it must not contain layers. So most of my icon files are in PNG format. So I just took a PNG and tried to drop it here, and it yelled at me and said, you know, it doesn't work because I had a mask layer in the PNG. So I actually converted the PNG to JPEG and then put it here, and it seemed to work fine. Again, you can put in the version, you can specify categories, copyrights, all kinds of contact info. And then here is where you pick the build that we will upload in just a moment. You can see, we'll wait and do that. We'll see what that looks like as a surprise later. App review information. And then you can specify whether you want to manually release the version once Apple finally approves it, or if you just want it to immediately show up in the store once Apple finally approves it. And that's up to you, what you want to do. And then you can check status and whatnot. So it can take a little while to get all this information, you know, in place. Getting the screenshots together is probably the biggest hassle, just because you got to run the app so many times and take the pictures and save them and then copy them over here. Not the end of the world, I suppose. So let's get our build uploaded here. So we go back to the Finder, and this is our build here, this IPA file. So in order to upload it, we again need to use Xcode to access the tool. So if you go to Xcode, in the developer tool menu here is an app called Application Loader. That's the one we want. And this again, you'll log in using your Apple ID, and you'll select deliver your app, and then choose, and then we'll pick the app that was built today. And then finally, I remember this a little while ago, and now we're finally seeing the error. The short version must be specified. So let's go back to Xojo and specify that. So the short version is right here. Now I'm actually going to, we'll leave it like 0, as this might give us another error we can look at. Because I did submit one yesterday that had version 1.0.0. And I believe with each subsequent update to your app, this needs to be different, or it's going to generate an error. So let's just have it like that and do another build. All right, go back to Application Loader. So now it correctly found the short version, which is good. So it passed its initial quick test of everything. So then we can click the next button here. And it's going to send it off to iTunes Connect. All right, and this is the other error I was expecting, is I did upload a test yesterday, and I also called it the same thing, 1.0.0, and the build numbers have to be different. So I need to do another build and change the build number here. Now this came up now because I did a test yesterday. I'm doing another one today, but this could come up for you as well if you're doing you do a build and you upload it, and then maybe as you're doing screenshots, you notice something's not right, and you're like, oh crap, I want to redo the build and upload another one. Well, you're gonna have to do the same thing here and make sure you up the version so that you can upload your newer build. Also, the same situation would happen if you get everything packaged up, you submit it for review, and then it comes back and Apple tells you, oh, something's not right, you need to fix this. You'll need to create a new build, up the version, before you upload it, or you'll get that error. So here I'll just make it 101, and we'll do yet another build. And it did pick all that information up, and we'll let it communicate to iTunes Connect again, and hopefully we don't get any errors this time. Hooray. So it did all the verification it needed to. So now it's just going to upload it, which won't take long because it's just a small app. Now I have seen windows that can pop up after this upload that might give you additional error information. I haven't seen anything like that lately, so they may have changed this app in one of the newer versions of Xcode. But it's possible that you could get warnings back or something. In particular, one warning you'll get if you go through all these steps right now with the current version of Xojo, because it only creates 32-bit iOS apps, is you'll actually get a warning back that says, reminder, App Store is requiring universal apps that contain 32 and 64-bit executables in them. I'm not getting the error or that warning here in Application Loader. I think I'll get that sent to me as an email later. But everything uploaded. So now our step here with Application Loader is done. So we can go back to iTunes Connect. And sometimes it takes a moment, but we can try refreshing. If you scroll back down to the section down here on Add a Build, and you click that, it shows you all the builds you've uploaded. So you can see this was the one I uploaded yesterday as the test, and this is the one we just did now. So I can say, all right, this is the build I actually want to submit. So I will add that particular build to this particular project. So then I can fill in all this stuff. And once I'm happy and have everything filled in, the step to actually submit it is submit for review. And once you click that button, that's where the waiting game starts. And you have nothing to do but wait. There is if I go to this page here, the steps for submitting to the App Store, there's a link here to this website, App Review Times, that does a tracking of how long things have taken to get approved. And right now they're estimating about 8 days for iOS App Store submissions. The last time I did submit the TipView app, it took 10 days from submission to approval in the store. All right, James is asking if they will reject the app if it is not 64-bit. Not yet, but soon. They will, from what they've been saying, reject apps that are not 64-bit starting on February 1st, which is less than a week away. You can use, obviously, the beta, if you're in the beta program, to do a build and a submit. If you're not in the beta program, you can check with us to see if you might get added. Certainly if you have real iOS apps that you're building and ready for submission, it might be something good to get beta tested. So that's the status on that. And Mike is asking, how does this process differ for submission to the Mac App Store? Well, on a high level, it doesn't differ a whole heck of a lot. But the big difference is that on the Xojo side, there's not these two settings for Mac apps. We don't have built-in code signing, and we don't have building for the Mac App Store switches, which do packaging and stuff like that. So we're doing all that for the iOS side because it kind of has to be done, but we're not yet doing that on the Mac side. So you either have to do that manually, or there are, I believe, at least a couple products out there, third-party Xojo products that can do that for you. So certainly you can. App Wrapper, I think, is one I saw advertised in the latest issue of Xojo Developer Magazine, and that can do a lot of these manual steps for you on the Mac side, anyway. The important thing to consider on the Mac side, just to go off on that tangent a little bit, is that distributing the Mac App Store is not a requirement for Mac software. But there are differences. So if you do submit your stuff to the Mac App Store, it does have to be what's called sandboxed, and that limits some of the things that apps can do. For example, they can't just access any part of the file system. And to do certain things, you may need to request what's called an entitlement, to essentially ask for permission. So some of those can be a little bit more annoying on the Mac side because people aren't used to having to do that. But you do have to deal with that if you're submitting to the Mac App Store. But that, I think, covers my notes here. Let me just check my other page. Oh yeah, I do have one other thing I want to point out when you're testing these things. If should something go wrong with your certificates or profiles or whatnot, you can actually remove them and start over. All right, so that's not the window I want. I want this one. All right, so the process of Xcode pulling down all those profiles or whatnot results in files being stored in your file system. And they're in the user library mobile device folder here in provisioning profiles. And you can see there's a whole bunch of them. Now, if something starts to go wrong and for some reason, you're getting errors back from Xojo or the submission process, what seems to be a common technique that people have tried, and this is based on Stack Overflow stuff, it's not really Xojo specific, is they've removed all these things. So they've come to this folder, selected everything, and just deleted it all. And then they fired up Keychain, which is in your utilities folder, application utilities folder. So it's Keychain Access right here. And then you find your keys and certificates in Keychain, and you delete all those. That essentially is what I did today to reset everything that I did yesterday in the test. And that kind of sets things back to square one so that you can start back at step one in Xcode and request the development profile and have it pull everything down and kind of start over. And that seems to solve nearly everyone's issue. I haven't found a solid answer on Stack Overflow for what on earth causes these particular problems, but this at least seems to be kind of a troubleshooting task that you can do to clear things up and essentially start over. So that was the other thing I wanted to point out. Like I said, the Xojo 2015 release 1 is in beta at the moment, and that does have that creates 64-bit builds. And actually what it creates is universal builds. So there's no setting that you're going to see over here that says create a 64-bit build or a 32-bit build. It creates what's called a universal binary, which contains both the 64-bit and 32-bit builds. And they're all in essentially the single bundle that is what you end up submitting to the App Store. And that's necessary because not all iOS devices are 64-bit yet. The newer ones obviously are. But devices that are still supported, such as the iPhone 5, the iPad mini, the iPad 2, those are 32-bit. I'm not sure. The iPhone 4S is 32-bit. I think the 5S is when they started with 64-bit. So that both of the 32-bit and the 64-bit apps, the builds, need to be included in this package so that your app will run on all supported devices. So that is what Apple's actually requiring. So like I said, that's in beta. It's obviously not going to be released before February 1st because beta is not done yet, but it will be released pretty soon. So hopefully it won't be too much of a problem for people. A lot of you are probably still right now just in the development process and aren't quite ready to submit to the App Store. But like I said, if you are and you think you might be able to help with the beta program, just contact the technical support folks. I think it's emails productsupport@xojo.com and make your case and see if you can get added to the beta list to help us test. All right, I'm going to just scan the questions here, see if there's anything I missed. I think I got through them all. All right, that looks like all the questions, and it looks like everything I wanted to get through today. I will have uploaded sometime this afternoon, depending on when I have to go out and move snow, the Xojo Notes project that you see here that works on both iPhone and iOS. So that will show up on the usual places, which right now still remains the wiki. So it's not on this site yet. I'm still moving content over there. So it still will be on this site here, and you can click on webinars and videos, and there'll be an entry here. I'll probably put the link to Xojo Notes in both of them, the download link in both of them, but this will have the new entry will show up for the recording for this webinar with download links, so you can grab that project and play around with it, and expect it to show up in 2015 R1 as well when it's released. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for attending. Have a great day.